Dear new World of Warcraft player, we here at Solo Q wish to extend our apologies to you as you attempt to begin your adventures in Azeroth. Sorry if you have been sitting patiently at your computer with your character kicking at the dirt in a capital city, waiting for more information about how to get started in the World of Warcraft in 2024. Fortunately, it is still 2024, and we have cleared the schedule to complete your introduction. While we regret the delay after part 1 of this instructive tome of oral knowledge, really? That's what we're calling this? Okay. We remind you that we are not liable for any character deaths or costly auction house purchases you may have experienced before your training was complete. You are not entitled to compensation, especially as you do not have a fiscal stake in this outlet of information. Yes, except for you three, we will deal with you later. We hope that the resumption of the flow of information continues to be helpful to you, and we appreciate your patience and the fact that we cannot hear your snarky comments about time management, procrastination, and executive function. Best wishes for slaying all of your enemies and finding the coolest things to ride around on in-game. Sincerely, the management of Solo Q, including the lawyers who forced me to read this. You have entered the Solo Queue, a monthly podcast about adventuring alone in the world of Warcraft. Thanks for joining me. My name is Dave Gagne. Welcome to episode 12 of Solo Q, a monthly or so podcast about adventuring alone in the world of Warcraft. It is the long-awaited second part to our introduction of World of Warcraft to new players. Is it possible in the year 2024 to jump into this 20-year-old game? We started exploring that in May in episode 8. Well, have you ever heard of a 3-month halftime for a Super Bowl? Or had to clap for days for a band to actually play their encore? Yeah, me neither. So sorry for the delay. I know it's been some time. Summertime for teachers is definitely a different pace. It is a slower thing, but it is also the time when I have to catch up on a lot of other things. So getting the July episode out, getting the interview with Jin out, getting lots of things done around the house. It has been a busy summer. It's been a busy summer, but a good summer. Hopefully it's been a good summer for you out there. I'm glad to be back, and I'm glad to be getting back to this, especially as we get closer to the War Within launch. We are in the pre-patch event, basically a giant leveling bonanza. So if you are hearing this now and before the end of August, it is a great time to get any level of character, even level 1, into the... Well, I think you have to be like level 10 to get into the event, but basically any level of character. You can hop in there in a matter of hours, be moving your characters through. If you want to zoom to max level 70, and be ready for the new content, you want to ignore the last 19 and a half years of World of Warcraft, I think that's okay. You can come back to it, but if you want to zoom to level 70 and get ready for the oncoming expansion, this is the way to do it. I've taken numerous characters through this leveling experience. Many of them were level 60. A lot of times I was moving characters who maxed out before Dragonflight, but did not really participate in Dragonflight, so they're still sitting at level 60. Well, took them through the event. Many of them, within an hour, they went from level 60 to level 70. Some of them a little bit longer. I think as I got used to the event, my record, I'm, maybe a little proud to say, 41 minutes to go from level 60 to level 70 on one character. I've even taken a level 30 character, and over the course of a few hours, it took a little bit, but up to level 70. So all of it's possible, and all of it is kind of available right now. That said, you can dive into any number of the ways to play this game that I talked about back in May. And that episode was recorded in May, and I do want to get back to that. Back to the second half of that episode, which means, where were we? What was I talking about when we broke things off in May? Yeah, I don't remember either. I actually had to go and listen to the episode again, even though I have all the audio here, just to try and connect it, get an introduction to it, get you back into the flow of all the stuff I was introducing you to. And that said, things have changed actually since May. Not unexpectedly, Blizzard has added some of the changes and implemented some of the things that they plan to. So now I can comment a little more knowledgeably on a couple of those things. And what I'll do is I'll kind of comment on that before I jump to the May recording, just as a way of introducing. So without much further ado, sorry to make you wait. Sorry that it's been a little bit of time, but here is the second half of information that I think is helpful and pretty important to just either know or be aware of if you are new getting into the World of Warcraft in 2024, in its 20th anniversary year. All right, here we go. There are two areas that I want to circle back to and mention, just to give you a little bit more information before we head into part 3. First one is the maps. Maps in-game, I mentioned a little bit, but I want to give you a little bit more detail. And this is a good time because Blizzard has added some new features to the map. If you press L is the quest log. It brings up the map, a small map and a quest log, all the quests that your character has acquired. Sometimes there'll even be quests that other characters have acquired that you could do on your whole account, on any of your characters. As you get into the game, you'll also notice that this quest log will add campaign quests. So whatever story you're working on, however you're progressing through, Blizzard has done a good job of starting to organize these quests. You do have a max limit. I believe the quest log used to max out at 25. Maybe it got bumped up to 30. I know it got bumped up recently, but it's a lot, but you can fill it up. So I'll say that. If you hit your M button for map, that's going to bring up a full-size map, full screen map. If you right click on the map, you will zoom out probably to the continent that you're on. If you press it again, out to the world, and then likewise, if you left click on a continent, you will zoom in, and then left click on a zone, you'll zoom in again. Those are essentially the couple different levels of zoom. Actually, if you go back out, you can pick which planet you want to go on. There are currently 4 planets: the Shadowlands Realm, Outland, Draenor, and Azeroth. So that's how to navigate in and around the maps. The other thing I want to mention about the maps is this. I believe towards the top, again, on mine, it's towards the top. I think it's also towards the top in the regular game unmodified. But you want to click on the map legend, and the map legend is going to show you a whole slew of information, and this is really the thing I wanted to mention because this did not exist until recently. This is one of the improvements that Blizzard has made to the game. It used to be that there were a couple types of quests in the game. They were slightly differentiated. Well, now Blizzard has gone to great lengths to really identify different types of quests, different importance. So if you're looking at this map legend, you can see it in game. You can also Google it real quick. It was put out a while back, but I'm just going to talk through them briefly. 8 different types of quest markers that you will see on the map. There's campaign quests, which I mentioned a second ago, the kind of the driving story of whatever expansion you're in. There are legendary quests, which are kind of the utmost importance. It says quests that give legendary rewards, go figure. There are repeatable quests. These are often daily quests, but sometimes they are weekly. Essentially, there's a blue exclamation point. The exclamation point in general means, hey, here's something that you haven't seen yet. Go check it out. Once you accept a quest, they have a new icon for that as well. There is the in progress quest, which is a circle with a couple dots, kind of like when you're texting and there's dots and you're waiting for something to come in. They've kind of done a play on that. So you can see that there are quests out there that have not been finished yet, but you've accepted them. They're in your quest log. There is now a pink triangle exclamation point for important quests. Another blue with a kind of a blue sun background thing that is meta quests. These are time-gated quests that give valuable endgame rewards. There is the simple yellow exclamation point, which used to be every single quest. That is now what they are calling a local story, what we used to kind of call side quests or side adventures. These are little quests that often add a lot of flavor to the game. They're not part of the main story. They're not often required. They might be required for some achievements, do all the things in an area. But in general, if you're following along in the story, these are not the more important things to focus on. So you can ignore them, pass them by. A lot of times come back to them later. Again, a lot of flavor in some of these local stories, a lot of fun if you're reading the quest text, which I hope you will. I suggest you do. And then the exclamation point turns into a question mark when your quests are done. And as I say this, I wonder, why a question mark? You're done. The questions are answered. You're just going to pick up your loot. But regardless, that's how it's been kind of forever. So if you see filled in question marks, that is the place where you need to go to turn in the quests that you've finished to get your gold and your loot and your experience and whatever you're going to get. In addition to that, there are a bunch of other things that are listed. There are world quests, which are another form of kind of time-sensitive questing that comes and it goes away, sometimes weekly, sometimes by hours, by parts of days. There's a whole lot of stuff. There are world bosses, there are public events, there are bonus objectives. There are a lot of different symbols on that map, but there is really good detail as to what those things are. The map is more useful than it's ever been. Additionally, dungeons and raids are marked on the map. There are flight points which have gotten a green boot. I believe the boot is green when you know the flight point. Let me zoom in and take a look here. Come on. Flight points come in various colors. Looking like, at least in the map I'm looking at, blue is a flight point that you know. Yellow or gold is a flight point that exists, but you don't know it yet. You can't fly to it yet because you haven't been there on foot. Once you find them on foot, then you can fly to and from them. So they're identified on the map, even if you can't use them yet. Additionally, if you fly from one place to another and there are flight points below you that you don't know, you can't stop at them. You can just fly over them. You'll still fly right over it. But you can't hop out and say, hey, I want to learn this flight point and hop back on. Doesn't work that way. Still got to get there on foot. So check out the map legend. Super helpful, making the map more useful than ever. The second area that I want to talk about and revisit really quick, somewhat quick, let's not lie, is gear. I frankly find the system of gear in World of Warcraft to be extremely confusing, having too many layers, too many words, too many things going on. But I have gone and found some information, and I want to talk through it just a little bit, just so you're a little bit familiar, a little bit more familiar. In part one, I talked a little bit about gear. I mentioned that there are rarity levels, such as common items, rare items, epic items. We talked about legendary items. So there's kind of different rarities. There are also different armor types. Your character can be wearing one of 4 different armor types, whether it's cloth, leather, mail, or plate. And that is defined by the class that you are playing. You can wear things underneath you, like lighter and less effective, but you can't wear heavier than whatever your class is geared at. So cloth wearers are, the weakest armored, all the way up to plate mail, we'll say plate armor wearers. There are many weapons as well, various one-handed weapon, two-handed weapons, main hand versus an offhand weapon, anything from staves to axes to maces to pole arms to, and then ranged weapons, of course, whether it's a bow, crossbow, a gun, all sorts of things. Daggers, big, small, everything in between. There are shields, of course, which, you're often using a one-handed weapon in one hand and a shield in the other. The offhand weapons can be anything from books to torches to lanterns to fish to all sorts of things. There are warglaives. There are many different types. Again, kind of like armor, your class and sometimes even your spec will determine what types of weapons you can effectively use. So you may get a weapon drop for you that you can't use. A lot of times the little text will be red. That red identifies this as, let's say I am I'm a feral druid. Why not? If I get a shield, the word shield will literally be written in red because I can't equip that item. I can't use it. I can't put it on. So some things you just end up selling for the gold, and that's great. That's part of your loot. There's a really big change that is now here. I think I mentioned it in part one, but it is now here, and that is how you equip these items and whether you can equip these items or whether you have to equip these items. I mentioned before an item that is bind on pickup means as soon as you pick up that item, you kill the snake, and inside the snake there is a gleaming sword. As soon as you pick up that loot from the dead snake carcass, that sword is now yours. And in World of Warcraft, we say something is yours, it is soulbound. It is bound to your soul. You can sell it to a vendor. You cannot sell it to another player. You cannot trade it to another player. You can't put it in the mail and send it to somebody. It is yours, but you've used it. You've dirtied it. I don't know. You can sell it to a vendor for gold, and that's about it. There are other weapons that you can pick up and you can carry and essentially not equip. Like, I'm not putting this armor, chest armor on. I'm just going to throw it in my bag because I may want to sell it to somebody else. That is called bind on equip. Until I strap into that piece of armor, it is not mine, meaning it is not soulbound. If it's not soulbound, it can be traded on the auction house. It can be sold. It can be sent. I can mail it to people. I could mail it to my own characters. There are a couple other things called bind on account, which essentially means you've got something and you can share it with any other character on your own Battle.net account, meaning, one of your characters. But you can't send it to other people, other players. It may or may not even have a value to sell. These bind on account things, sometimes they're tokens, sometimes they're actual items. And that's less common. What is more common is the BOE, bind on equip, that you carry around and you can do anything with, and the bind on pickup. One of the big differences here is as soon as you equip an item, you learn that item's appearance, what we call its appearance. And I know I mentioned that before, but this is a big part of the game for some people, collecting appearances, collecting different armors, different robes, different hats, different whatevers to make your character look the way you want them to look. Because you can do what is called transmogrify them. That means change the appearance. So yes, I am wearing that big strapping piece of plate mail armor on my chest, but really I'm going to go in and I'm going to change that to a pink tutu top or something. Some different appearance. I'm still getting the benefit of the armor. I'm just literally making my character appear different. So you need to learn those appearances. If you go into a raid, an old raid, you're farming for transmog, what we call farming for transmog appearances, and you get a green item that is bind on equip. It's green because it is uncommon rarity, and you do not put that item onto you, you haven't learned the appearance. You could take that and you could go sell it. There are some appearances in the game that people will pay a lot of money for to learn. I've never kind of cracked that market. I think it seems super mystical and smoky and weird, but you can make a lot of money doing that in gold in game. But when you go pick up that item, if you have not yet learned it, you won't learn it if you then turn around and sell it. And if you equip the item, you do learn the appearance, but it's now soulbound and you can't sell it. You can't get rid of it. You can only vendor it, what we call vendoring it. A lot of times there may be transmog appearances in the game that are highly sought, and people would literally pay tens, 50, hundreds of thousands of gold to get, that if you went to the vendor, you could sell it for a couple copper or a couple silver or maybe a couple gold. Like, the difference can be super drastic. Vendor price does not consider desirability or market forces, supply and demand, any of that stuff. It is completely outside of that. Now, one of the big changes that's coming in the War Within, and has actually arrived already in the game, is a third kind of middle ground to this, and that is the idea of Warbound gear. It's not bind on pickup. It's also not bind on equip. Bind on equip means I could give it to anybody. Bind on pickup means I can give it to nobody because I immediately own that piece. It is now mine. Warbound equipment is a interesting middle ground, because when I get Warbound gear, essentially it says Warbound until equipped. That means I can pass it around to any one of my characters. I can't auction house it, I can't mail it to my friend on another account, but I can get it to any one of my characters, and I can do that easily. I don't have to mail it, I can just drop it into my Warbank. The Warbank is another big feature that has arrived with the War Within. The Warbank is a separate bank function that all of your characters have access to, regardless of if they have purchased their own bank slots and have started to, banks, if I didn't mention it, and may not have, are essentially a storage place for items and money. Every character can buy bank slots that will give you a chance to stash some things. And a character that has things can put anything in there, but only that character can see those things. Now, if you are in a guild, an official group inside of Warcraft, guilds also have banks, and inside of a guild bank, you can put things, but you can't put soulbound items because those things are bound to you. A lot of guild banks will store up materials, crafting materials, items out in the real world, not in the real world, sorry, out in Azeroth that you will collect that are used to make other items, often armor and weapons and gear, but also some other things. A little bit later, I'm going to get into the professions, and that's where your character can choose some abilities in certain directions and use these materials to make other things that are useful in the game. But more to come on that a little bit down the road. Sometimes guilds will kind of pool their resources, and so guild banks can be very good for that. This Warbound idea is essentially a built-in guild for your own characters, regardless of race or class or even faction. All of your Horde characters and your Alliance characters have access to anything that gets put into the Warbank, and those will be Warbound until equipped items. So right now, if you are in the pre-patch for the War Within, you're going to get some weapon drops, or if you go to the vendor, you're going to buy things that are Warbound until equipped, meaning you can give them to your alternate characters, your alts. Drop them into the bank of the Warbank, or drop them in the mail if you want to do that. But it is really easy to go to the bank, select the Warbound tab, and drop things into there, and any one of your characters can access them. Huge new feature. It makes sharing items massively massively easier. I'll mention one more thing before we change gears with gear. And that is, there is news coming about collecting appearances. And it used to be that if I were a mage, mages wear cloth armor. If I run through an old dungeon and I collect a whole bunch of gear, including leather armor and mail armor and plate armor and weapons that I can't possibly use, if those items were soulbound, and many of them are, then they were useless. I did not learn the appearance for those weapons that I can't equip. I did not learn the appearance for any armor that I cannot wear. And so, let's say I really wanted some plate armor and some cloth armor in this one certain raid. Well, I would have to go in and do that raid with two different characters. You know, somebody wearing plate armor like a warrior, and somebody wearing cloth armor like a mage. And I would have to repeat all of these things. Coming soon, Blizzard is going to make that change, that if I go into that raid and I collect a whole bunch of cloth gear, yep, I'm going to learn those appearances. But even if I collect other appearances, I will learn them. Essentially, I will learn them for my warband, which is literally just all of my characters. But all of my characters is not a catchy phrase, so they went with Warbound, and Warband makes sense. Now, I can't use the armor. Like, if I find a nice gleaming shield, my mage can't actually use the shield. It's still useless to him or her, but when my Death Knight goes into his appearances, that shield will show up as an appearance that he or she could use. And that's going to change everything. And in my opinion, that's going to make running druids through old raids and dungeons just the best way to do everything, because of the speed that they have. They have the ability to kind of run through things without mounting up. So, or if you have other characters that have additional speed, because now you can grab all those appearances and use them as you want. Okay, last bit about gear. Okay, and then we're gonna get to part 3. And frankly, this is the part that I do not understand super well, partly because, well, for two reasons. Partly because I think there are too many words and levels and things and stuff going on, but also because I don't really use this system very much. A A lot of it has to do with dungeons and raids and Mythic Plus dungeons and the different levels of endgame current content. And I don't tend to do those because I don't tend to group up and do those things. And this is the upgrade system. When you get a piece of gear, it's going to come at a certain level. And if it is of a certain quality and a certain source, you're going to be able to upgrade its level and its statistics. And this is a way of saying, hey, you just earned a thing, but as you get more powerful, you don't have to go and refine the same weapon. You can collect, I hate this word, but I'm going to use it because it's appropriate. You can collect things and use those things to upgrade your, let's say, your weapon. You've got a two-handed sword and you got it and it was X level, but now you're further into the expansion. You want to upgrade it. If you do a certain number of dungeons or raids or other content, you're going to get these things. I'll explain things in a second, but you're going to get these things and you can use those things to then make your two-handed sword X plus 7 or X plus 10, or you can keep moving it up. And on its face, that sounds simple and good and great. I don't have to go use, RNG, which is random chance, to hope that I get that same sword, but at a higher level, because now I'm 3 levels higher in the game. If I do the content, if I do the stuff, I'll get the things that'll allow me to upgrade it. But you can only upgrade things so much. And so the last way that you want to think about gear is there are different sets of upgrade gear types. This is so complicated. There are 6, and I'm looking at an article from epiccarry.com, which I think actually found one of the better explanations of the gear system in a visual way that makes sense to me and in my brain. But there are 6 gear sets. From lowest to highest, they are, and they are going to be in this coming expansion, Explorers set, Adventurers set, Veterans set, Champions set, Heroes set, and Myths set. And essentially, each one of those has levels inside of it. This is like nesting dolls. This is crazy. Each one has usually 8. I think the Myth track, sometimes they're called tracks as well because they're upgrade tracks. I actually don't usually see or hear the word set, so this is slightly different. But upgrade tracks, there are usually 8 upgrades inside of each one of these tracks. I think the Myth set now has 6, and the 0 level of each has a certain level of eye level gear, like item level. Eye level is item level. According to the chart in this article, Explorer track begins at item level 558, and that is stage 1, or upgrade number 1 of 8 possible. And you can upgrade Explorer gear all the way to Explorer 8 of 8, and that will get you item level 580. So that's 12 item levels. At eye level 571, that's where Adventure gear kicks in. Adventurer gear starts equal to Explorer 5, and Adventure gear goes up 8 levels. And similarly, at Adventurer 5, which is 584, Veteran gear kicks in at Veteran 1 of 8. And it looks like, according to this, Veteran goes up 8 levels to 606. But at Veteran 5, Champion gear kicks in. Champion gear goes up 8 levels to 619. But pattern is the same, which is why I like this visual, and you should check this link out on epiccarry.com. Hero gear kicks in at Champion 5, and Hero gear goes up 8 levels. Oh, sorry. goes up 6 levels. This is where it changes. At Hero 5, level 623 now, the Myth track starts. And Myth gear goes up 6 upgrades, levels, tracks, whatever, up to item level 639. So in those 6 kind of overlapping gear tracks, that's how you upgrade your gear. And the more difficult the content you do, the higher upgrade track your gear is going to come. So if you're doing very low level gear, or if you're just doing quests out in the world, you know, kind of normal stuff, you're going to get an explorer grade gear. As you progress in difficulty in general, you're going to get loot that falls on different tracks, on higher and higher tracks. And if you're doing the hardest content in the game, that's when you're going to start getting that Myth track gear, the hardest gear to get, the highest level gear, because it's honoring, you know, you doing the hardest content. It all makes sense. It's just so confusing. Now, if you're like, okay, that's not bad, I understand, you explained it so well. I hope that's true, but I would argue the chart actually identifies it so well. This makes sense. It's the first time I've seen a chart like this. I really like it. But that's not all. How do you upgrade from Explorer 5 to Explorer 6? Well, you need to collect the things I mentioned earlier. And the things are crests. In Dragonflight, they were dragon crests, I believe. In the War Within, they are going to be called Harbinger crests. So essentially, you need 2 different things to do those upgrades. You need crests and you need stones. In Dragonflight, they were called Flight Stones. They are now going to be called Valor Stones. You're going to receive Valor Stones for doing content, for doing raids, for doing dungeons. You also need crests. When you get low-level crests, you can actually get enough of them and turn them into the higher-level crests. I believe there is essentially, well, it looks like there are 4 different types of crests. The 6 gear tracks each require a different one of the 4 crests. Explorer requires Weathered Harbinger's crest. The Adventurer's set requires a Carved Harbinger crest. Then the Runed Harbinger crest is for 2 more tracks. And then the last 2, Hero and Myth, they use the Gilded Harbinger crest. It is a lot of moving pieces. It's a lot of things. It is not the most complicated thing in the world. My brain just doesn't like it, and it frankly feels really hard to explain, and I hope you understand it better than I do. Again, maybe if I did more of the dungeons and the raids, it would come a little bit more easily to me, but I think it's overly complicated, and I don't see that changing because this is very similar to what was in Dragonflight. I think a lot of people liked it. I sort of just stood mouth agape for 2 years that people really liked this as a way to do this, but okay, whatever. If you get into the gear stuff, I think it'll make more sense. Check out this article. I think this will help explain it, at least, you know, the rankings and then the progression through all of these levels for all the gear. But gear is really at the heart of this game. You need higher and higher levels of gear if you want to keep progressing in difficulty, if you want to keep achieving a high enough eye level or item level score so that you qualify for some of these dungeons and raids. And the upgrade system is at the heart of that. So I wish you well. How's that? Okay, that is all I want to say about gear, probably for like 5 years, but there it is. The maps are good, and now we need to get into part 3 and take us the rest of the way home on how to start playing WoW now. Okay, we are on to section 3. And I promise you the last 3 sections are much shorter than the first 2. Section 3, modifications and customizing the game inside of the game. This is kind of a hodgepodge a little bit. There's some tips in here. There's some, a few things that you should do. Okay, one of the first things you should do when you get into a new character is you need to set auto loot. Auto loot means every time you click on a corpse of something you just killed, instead of picking all the items one by one that you are going to gather and add to your bags, it will auto grab everything, and this will just save you eons of time in the end. So, to get to all of the game options and settings, hit the escape button. It's going to bring up the game menu, support, shop, what's new, options, edit mode, macros, add-ons, logging out, exiting the game, returning to the game. You want to click on options. And on the very first page of options, on the left, you can see there's a couple categories: gameplay, accessibility, system. Actually, while we're here, let's talk about these things. Controls. In the middle of the list of controls on the right side of that screen is auto loot. Go ahead and click auto loot so it is on. The box is yellow, and you will grab all of that stuff. I actually don't know what the loot key, the next option below it is. I never change it. I just use auto loot and everything is happy. Maybe you can use the shift key to loot when auto loot is checked, and auto loot and to auto loot when it is not. Huh. Don't know if that means you don't have to click on the body. I've never actually looked at this, and now that I'm looking at it, as you hover over, if you hover over where it says shift key, you're going to see some quest text. Sorry. You're going to see some alternate text or some explanation text. This is very common in the game. If you hover over a lot of things, it's going to give you some tips or tool tips or all sorts of things, context clues. This is one of those things. I think I'm not going to try and figure it out right now while we're making a podcast, but I'm going to go back and look at that. Taking a look, if you scroll down, you're going to see some options for the mouse and the camera. You can see all of these things. You can look up all of these things or hover over them, see if there are things that you need to do. The interface mode, you can set which things are going to display nameplates, the names or the health bars of enemies or friends or all of these things. You can control a lot of those things. Action bars are all of the rows of buttons that you can find inside of the UI, the user interface. There's a lot of buttons in Warcraft. There can be so many, so there are many flexible action bars that you can set and use and move buttons around. There are options for combat. There are options for the social aspects of the game. Don't ask me about those. I don't tend to know anything about them. There's a new thing called the ping system. There are key bindings. Key bindings are pretty cool because you can set what buttons on your keyboard do. So what shift this or just a straight 1, 2, 3. Some of those are preset, but you can reassign them, and essentially everything on your keyboard can become something. My suggestion is, keeping those things pretty standard, especially if you start to get into multiple characters. Keep a lot of things standard. That way it doesn't really matter which player, which character you're on. Your fingers are doing basically the same thing over and over again. If you go down to accessibility, you're going to find things related to the motion of the camera. Some people have issues with some of the motion or color. And so there's a lot of different options in there that you can hop into and see what's going on. And then at the very bottom, system settings, graphics. You can pick monitors, scales, render scales, the size of the screen that is on there. You can mess around with all of that. And probably most important is base game quality. You can set an overall graphics level based on the speed of your computer and the quality of the graphics card. You have all of those things, all what you want to do. If you want it to be looking, beautiful and amazing and don't mind if things run a little slower, then push that number. And if you want to go the opposite direction, you can. Audio will help you change from headphones to speakers or what have you. You can set different settings for different parts of the volume, music, effects, the ambiance in the background, the dialogue of the characters. Obviously, there is a languages button and there is a network button. So those are all the options there. Settings for the game. Poke around, especially if you're new to the game, and see which ones of those are useful to you. Now, the next, before I get into the next topic, there's one random. This was a suggestion from one of the Facebook members, and that was to know that you don't have to just use the keyboard to move around. As it's set, you can use WASD, as most games, to move forward, back, turn right to left. There's some strafing buttons there from E and Q. You can also do that if your keyboard has the arrow buttons. You can move on the right hand, on the right hand side. So you get a left move and a right move. You can also use your mouse to move. And if you push both buttons, you will just start moving, and you can move in the direction that your mouse can turn, the direction of your mouse. And that is a massive game changer. Frankly, I think I use all three of these. Sometimes I will switch to my right hand to move while I'm pushing buttons on for doing damage abilities. A lot of times I'll use my left hand to move if I'm not in combat, and then I will also use the mouse if I need to sort of steer and change directions. And yeah, there's a lot of ways to do it. So that's a random tip that's thrown in there for you. The next topic I am going to mention briefly and not get into is the idea of add-ons and real customization to the game. This is a absolute black hole that we could triple the length of this episode and still not really fully explore. There's kind of two types of things I want to mention. These are customizations or modifications or mods, as they are called, to World of Warcraft that are not put out by World of Warcraft. Blizzard has opened up its game in certain ways, and you can create programs that interact with the data that the game spits out and make modifications to, a lot of times it's to the visual appearance of the game or the data that the game is presenting to you. You can get warnings for things, you can change the look of everything, you can get different buttons. So there's a lot of ways, almost an infinite number of ways to modify the game. If you are into certain aspects of the game, people have written mods that will tailor your gameplay or help you with those things. If you can think of it, it is out there. It is fascinating. The two major types I'll mention are this. The first one is UI replacements, like user interface replacements. I use one. I do not use the standard Blizzard Warcraft interface, which you are seeing if you are a new player. You're seeing that with the decorative dragon things on the action buttons and the circle map and all of that. There was a time where that was very limited and people wanted to make changes to that. So a UI replacement add-on basically just swaps everything out and gives you control over a lot of things. And I started using ELVUI many years ago, and I've put enough work into it that I don't feel like changing it. So I continue to use that. It does a great job, and it's now the Warcraft that I'm familiar with. That there are others as well. Many of them are very customizable. You will hear probably the most famous couple out there are DBM, Dungeon Boss Mods, I think is the M. Essentially, it's a whole system of warnings and suggestions and assistance for end game, like dungeons and raids, all that sort of thing. That's a massively used add-on. Weak Auras is another add-on that, again, gives you visual information for various aspects of the game. Very flexible. I do not use Weak Auras. I am a little overwhelmed by them, intimidated by them, I guess, and I haven't really doved into them, whatever the past tense is. I may at some point. I also think in the future there is an episode for add-ons that solo players could or should be using, and I think we'll do that, just not today. And I'm already kind of getting into the other half of add-ons, the other category of add-ons, and that is just things that are very specific. They're not the UI necessarily, but they are specific to parts of the game. And as I said, those are just infinite. If you're collecting Transmog appearances, there is add-ons for that. If you're an auction house, economic kind of player, economy player, that is out there. The professions, that is out there. Like literally everything, all of it. If you're a mount collector or a collector of whatever, everything is there. Probably the most easy way, and this is probably the last I'll say on add-ons, is if you go to Overwolf on the internet and you download CurseForge. CurseForge is one of a couple sites that essentially list all of the add-ons and make it very easy to try them out, to install them into the game. But here's the thing, every time Warcraft updates itself, sometimes even weekly in small little changes, the add-on makers often have to make updates to their programs as well. Some are very good about it. Some of these are huge and have huge fan bases and therefore are very prompt in getting their updates. I do believe Blizzard makes their information available to add-on makers in, with a bit of a heads up so that they can update their add-ons essentially in real time as a fix goes live or as a patch comes out. Add-on makers have already had the chance to make sure their stuff works with the game. Every now and then, somebody makes an add-on that does something Blizzard doesn't want you to be able to do in the game, and they will put the kibosh to that, shut down that aspect of the technology. So every now and then, a good add-on that people like is seen kind of as cheating by Blizzard, and yeah. The gist of add-ons is this, that A, everyone wants to play in a different way, and B, Blizzard, this is not a criticism. I think in general, Blizzard has been slow-ish to offer changes inside the game, improvements inside the game, and that frustration means a lot of people have used the API, essentially the way inside of the Warcraft data to make changes to the game. And because so many people have done that, I think Blizzard has relied on that and not focused its efforts on improving aspects of the game because the mods are out there. In the past couple years, that has started to change, I think. And the next thing I'll mention is relative to the user interface. WoW has made its user interface much more editable and much more flexible. If you go back into the game menu, as I said, hit escape. Edit mode was one of the options. We did not click on it, but edit mode will essentially allow you to move items around on the screen, change their sizes. It's getting more flexible. It seems like every patch, every update, they've added something to edit mode. They're really fleshing it out. So you have more flexibility now without using modifications from outside of the game. So it's that tug of war of what do the players want and what does Blizzard want you to have, and who's going to make those things? Are they going to end up becoming part of the game? Sometimes things do get sort of swallowed up into the game, but I think the lively add-on community is going to continue to put out things that help make your life as a player easier. If you want to dive into YouTube videos on add-ons, be my guest. Really, it is a massive topic, but you're going to find things that will help you out. The last thing in this section that I'll mention is macros. Macros are kind of like keybinds. They are inside of the game. Again, in the game menu, hit escape, and macros is its own button. you can essentially you can pre-record certain actions or certain things and assign them a button. And now all of a sudden you've got a button that you can push that can do a thing, or sometimes even a couple of things. Some of these are helpful in looking out for rare monsters and things you're trying to find. Other times it's just automating certain tasks that maybe you do a lot. This is very flexible, and again, you can run afoul of what Blizzard wants you to be able to do. You know, for instance, you can't just say, push this button, then 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 loot the boss. Like, there's no one button to play the entire game. So between that and nothing, somewhere in between is the sweet spot of you can do a lot of things in macros to make your life easier. They're just not going to do everything. Okay, and that's section 3. On to section 4. We're almost there. The many ways to play World of Warcraft. Oh my goodness. And this is kind of the monumental part of this. And this is where you have to ask, what do you want from this game? What do you want to do in Warcraft? And yeah, know that there's a world out there. You may explore more things, or you may not. It's fine. Do you want to get to current content? Or how quickly? I suppose you do at some point, but do you want to just level and linger? Or do you want to race through it? Don't care about the past story right now, or maybe even ever, and you just want to get to what's going on now. And so that can affect your options and how you play the game. One of the biggest drivers of this game is what is referred to as the end game. End game means you have hit the maximum level. And when you hit max level in Warcraft, that is definitely not the end. That is, for some people, literally the beginning. They are trying to get there to get the most powerful items, the most powerful weapons, the strongest armors, all the abilities. And that's for them when the game starts. Maybe it's because they are getting into end game group PvE content, player versus environment. That PvE content is usually what we're talking about is dungeons, which are 5-person groups that head into a short encounter, 15, 20, 30, 40 minutes, or raids. And raids have evolved in many sizes, many different directions over the years, but now are essentially, I believe, 20 to 30 players with much longer content. It can be a couple hours sometimes. Depending on the difficulty you're doing. Both of these groups, dungeons and raids, both of these have different difficulty levels, from super easy, normal, heroic, mythic, and then we have another level for raids called LFR. LFR is essentially the easiest, and it is kind of open to everybody. Anybody can sort of join. Others, you want to create groups, and there may be people insisting on certain levels. Even the game will insist on certain levels at some point. This is the one big thing that Warcraft seems to drive everybody towards, whether or not it's your jam. In the past, Blizzard has required heading into certain dungeons for finishing quest lines or getting the whole story. The raids, which are, again, larger affairs, many more people, a lot of times there is big story content with these bosses. You've quested through a zone or a couple zones, you've done some dungeons, and now you've got to go kill the big boss, or you got to go do the big thing. And if you are, getting back to the solo part of the show, if you are someone who's playing alone and you don't want to join in these social groups, you're not seeing this content. That's very frustrating. Just this week, I know that Blizzard announced they made some tweaks to an old BFA, a Battle for Azeroth raid, that you can now, the mechanics are such by the bosses that a solo player can finally do that. You could always do it because of your level, because that expansion is now 4 years old. So you were powerful enough to do it, but the bosses did some things that required other people with you. Well, that has changed because farming old content, because you're super powerful, is one of those many ways to play the game. In fact, it's one of my favorite things to do. So I'm excited. Now I can go into those raids and experience that content, see those stories, try and remember what the heck the point was 4 years ago. To address that, there's another kind of dungeon that just came out. And if you've listened to this podcast, you've heard this, and frankly, it's the reason the podcast started. Follower dungeons. Follower dungeons are a flexible grouping tool where you can go in alone, or you can add 1 or 2 or 3 more friends. And essentially, anything under 5 is what you don't have for that 5-person group is going to get NPCs that join you, and they're going to do the job of tanking or healing or their additional DPS, and they're going to help you get through those things. So me, as a player who wants to do these things solo, I on some level, I wish this were a single player game, and I know it's not, and I don't expect it to be, but these little things allow me to hop into a dungeon, see all the stuff, get all the story, get some of the rewards. The content is a lower level when it's a follower dungeon, and I don't need the maximum level rewards because I'm not doing the maximum level work. That's been a great addition. I'm hoping that Blizzard follows this up with follower raids, so I can also see raid story again before it is 4 years old. Usually that's the standard, like two expansions ago, you should be able to get in and solo a lot of the content. I don't want to wait 4 years. I want the story when I need the story, when everyone else is getting the story, but I don't want to have to hop into a group of 19 to 29 other people who, have various social expectations or levels of rudeness or friendliness. I don't like rolling those dice. It's not my jam. So other people, that is a big part of what they do, the end game. Okay. PvP, player versus player. That's another whole aspect of the game that I haven't talked about. It comes in 2 flavors. One, the end game of PvP, which is battlegrounds, arenas, brawls. There is one more. I, for some reason, didn't list these right here. But there are various modes that you can play player versus player, and it's a different part of the game. It's a different thing. It's kind of like the dungeons and the raids in that it's a little bit off to the side. There are rankings or seasonal rewards. I am not the person to explain all of that. It really is the other big end game. And for some people, that's kind of all they do. They rush through the story just to get to max level so that they have access to all the big stuff, all the weapons and all the things. And then they're going ham on PvP options. And I think that's great. There are some podcasts out there that will tell you all about it. I know Technically PvP is a very solid PvP focused podcast. Give it a try if this is something you're interested in. There are, I don't know if there's solo. I guess there's some solo. The solo shuffle is something you could get into as a solo person. Others are groups of 3 for arenas, groups of 5 to 10 to 40. I think some of the battlegrounds are literally 40 people per side. A lot of options, a lot of flexibility, and that really is its own community, the PvP game. The other way to PvP is a little bit more tied to the PvE world, just the normal world, and that is something called War Mode. War Mode is essentially PvP mode for the normal game. If you're out leveling and you see somebody from the opposite faction, you are going to be hostile to each other and you can attack them. They are an attackable target, and as are you. That can be rewarding. There is some bonuses to doing that. It can also be not fun, because leveling doesn't really matter. If I'm a level 20 running around a certain zone trying to get these quests done, and a level 70 just happens to be flying by and wants to just smash me into the ground with one swing, that happens. Luckily, in Warcraft, when you die from a player, you don't really lose anything. You don't give up all your stuff, you don't lose gold, and you don't even necessarily take damage to your equipment. If you die to bosses or mobs or anything in the game that's not an other person, you do take some damage. You don't lose anything necessarily, but you do take damage that you have to then repair, not replace. No, maybe replace if you break it entirely. So repairing equipment can get very expensive. I know the people that do raids and dungeons, that is part of it, is paying for repairs, dying over and over again to try and solve the puzzle that is a dungeon or a raid, can get very expensive. So know that that's part of everything as well. One other thing I will mention in this area is the Great Vault. Great Vault was an addition a couple expansions ago, maybe in Shadowlands. I think it was in Shadowlands. I don't know a lot about it because essentially it is, hey, if you've done all of these great PvP accomplishments, or if you've done all of these mythic dungeons, or if you've done all of these raids, you're going to, at the end of the week, get some weekly rewards. And I've never really done that. I've never done any of those things, so I never get those great rewards or crappy rewards. Seems to be a lot of people just complain about how crappy the rewards were. That is going to change a little bit because in the War Within at the end of the summer, they are adding almost like a light dungeon called Delves. And Delves can be, I believe, a couple of players, or you can do it alone. Delves are not as big as dungeons, but they are essentially a small puzzle to solve, a small series of things to do. And those delves are designed for solo players, which is another fantastic addition to the game. I think they're getting good feedback on the testing, which is going on right now, the people in the alpha version of the War Within. And delves are going to be added to the Great Vault. So if you do a certain number of delves for the week, you will be eligible for rewards from the vault. And that is really exciting. I'm looking forward to that. My first Great Vault. A couple more aspects of the game or directions you can go in, and kind of related to both of those is having BattleNet friends. So friends inside of that Blizzard universe. Forming guilds. You could join a guild. I know this is a solo podcast. It's not a thing I tend to do, but other people may still be interested in doing that. There are social communities. You can do that inside the game, outside the game, but having those friends or those groups can make it easier to go ahead and do that group content, the dungeons and the raids and PvP. If you're not into that, I mentioned that warbands are coming. Warbands are kind of like a guild for all of your characters. It's going to make being a solo player a lot easier. And speaking of solo playing, solo content is a big aspect of the way I play, and I think a lot of solo players farming old content, like heading out into old things. Collecting is a big part of this game. With collections, you can collect mounts. That is a very common thing. Mount hunters, scouring old quests, old raids, old dungeons, old things to do, bosses to kill, to collect those mounts that you can use to ride around on. Transmog appearances for armor, for weapons. None of it for the level, none of it for the power, because as expansions go into the past, those weapons, the armor becomes statistically useless, not current. But when you transmogrify, when you just use the appearance of those things, you can change the aesthetics of your character while maintaining the statistics on your current gear. You're still really wearing your current gear. Another aspect of the game that some people enjoy, and this is, again, kind of on the solo path of things, is diving into the story, diving into the history of Warcraft, the lore that is presented both in-game and out of the game. In the game, you can go from zone to zone. I mentioned Lore Master a little while back. Lore Master is kind of a long path, a long accomplishment to get all the questing and all the stories being told inside of the game. And that's an adventure. Obviously, you could do it with others, but I think that's a largely solo adventure. For good or for bad, I think just because it has to be, a lot of the story being told, a lot of the history that is told in Warcraft is not actually in Warcraft. It is in books, it is in comics, it is in short stories. A lot of those things are just published outside of the game because there's just no way to put them inside of an MMORPG that caters to so many different playstyles and so many different players. So every expansion, there's at least one novel that comes out, sometimes multiple. There are comic strips, comic books that are often put out, short stories. A lot of these things are available for free on the Warcraft website. Some of them are for purchase. I know there's a book coming out soon for the War Within. I forget, maybe July it launches. So that can be a whole nother aspect of playing, is not playing and curling up with a good book and checking out some of the great content that's just going to flesh out this universe that is so fantastic. Another way to access that, of course, head to YouTube. YouTube videos. There are some people that focus their shows on the story, on the lore. And I think that works in two ways. One is the looking back of, hey, these are things that happened. Nobbel87, Nobbel 87, fantastic channel on YouTube with lots and lots of videos on aspects of the game, entire playlists to explain certain things. He is a fantastic master of diving deep into the lore. I heard from my Facebook group that Platinum WoW is a channel with like a lighter view of lore, smaller bites, maybe not as deep as Nobbel, and maybe that is appealing as well. I haven't checked him out yet, but I think that's a good place to go. On the podcast side, Live Laugh Lore. Fantastic podcast that takes lore topics, one or two at a time. They are now publishing every week, so check them out. And specifically, if you're new to all of this and you want a good place to get started, go to the podcast, Live Laugh Lore, episode 101. And literally it's 101, but it's also sort of a lore 101 in that they march through, with a little bit more detail than I did a little while ago, they march through the history of the lore of the Warcraft universe and give you a really good starting point that's about, I don't know, an hour or so long, give or take. I think they then continue in episode 103, kind of picking up where they left off. So that's a fantastic podcast to get sort of an audio version of things. Obviously, YouTube, you get the video as well, the visuals usually taken right from the game. In the past few years, Blizzard has put out 3 books called the Chronicles. Chronicles are basically a history of the universe by era. The 4th book is slated for soon, this year, I believe. Maybe it's in the fall, maybe it's in the summer, I'm not sure, but those books are fantastically rich in detail. If you want to hop into those as well, there's a lot of lore, and a lot of it is super interesting if that's the direction you want to go with things. Related to, I'll say the last thing, actually the last thing in this whole section, 2 things. I'm sorry, there's 2 things in this section. One more direction for the game that is related to social, like playing with multiple people, is RP play or role playing. And some people get very into that as an acting out of your character and obviously an interacting with other characters to make the game very much your own and to really dive into the RP aspect of the MMORPG. It is not common. It's a relatively small portion of the game if you look at the number of servers devoted to that versus the number of servers to everything else, but that doesn't mean there aren't thousands and thousands of players doing that. And in fact, there are add-ons out there, I mentioned add-ons before, that will help you with your RP. And I hear great things about that. It's not necessarily the thing I want to do, but if you are interested in that, it is there, and so are the add-ons to help you do that. Okay, the last playstyle that I want to mention, or last aspect of the game that I want to mention, is this, and it is essentially playing the economy in some way, shape, or form. Warcraft has professions built into it, things that you can focus on. There's some secondary professions that everybody can do: fishing, cooking, and archaeology, and those can actually be a good way to level. You get experience from fishing and archaeology, if I remember correctly. Maybe from archaeology, maybe not fishing. There are also 11 primary professions, and each character can do 2. There are 2 types of professions. There are gathering professions and crafting professions. Gathering professions, you essentially are getting raw materials. Those are skinning, as in after you kill something that has a leather type skin, you can skin it, collect the leather. So skinning, mining, finding rock nodes in the game and mining them for various minerals. You can do herbalism, where you are picking various flowers and herbs in the game. And you can do, there's actually one kind of a combo. Enchanting is kind of a combination, because you can take equipment, you can take armor and weapons and things, and you can disenchant them and essentially like break them down, take out their magical qualities, and that becomes a resource that you can use for enchanting other things. So enchantment is kind of a gathering in a way. For people who run a lot of old content, you get so much equipment that is old and useless unless you need the appearances, but essentially all of that extra stuff can be disenchanted and turned into materials for the enchanting profession. And let's see if I can name all the crafting professions. Let's see. Here we go. Leather making, which pairs really well with skinning for creating leather. Blacksmithing. You make a lot of armor, plate armor, mail armor. There is tailoring, which is essentially making things out of cloth. And so you can be crafting gear as a profession. You could be crafting cloth armor with tailoring. You can be making leather armor with leather making. You can be making mail armor and plate armor as a blacksmith. In addition to those 3, there is the enchanting that I mentioned, inscription, engineering. Did I get them all? I can't remember. Each of those professions, each of those crafting professions will allow you to create objects that may be useful and may be desired, and you can sell them on the auction house. Auction house is literally just that. You put things up, auctions, prices, and that is a way to make money. Similarly, you can, as a gatherer, doing the skinning or herbing or mining, you can take those materials, or mats, as you will hear them referred to as, you can take those mats, those raw resources, and you can put them on the auction house as well and make money. So some people make money by just gathering and selling. Other people are buying those materials from the auction house and then crafting them into something that they can sell for more money. Some people get way into it and they do the whole thing. And you may have an army of characters that are gathering and then sending over to another character. They are going to craft it and either outfit your crew of people or you're selling it off, each of the professions has a whole progression of recipes, of skill levels. That's an area that Blizzard has really fine-tuned and gave a big update to in the last essentially 2 expansions or so. The last few years, professions have gotten a healthy upgrade and update. So those can be their own game and their own system of progression as well. Sometimes you are trying to track down rare recipes or high-level recipes in certain ways, and so the game can lead you in those directions. And that's a fantastic place to be. Some people just want to play the auction house in that they are focused on buying and selling. They're buying low, selling high, shifting things from one place to another, finding what's in demand, acquiring it. That can be a whole game unto itself. We have arrived at the final section, and that is where to get help. Where to go for more information, because as long as this episode has been, it is just the tip of so many icebergs, which again is why this game is daunting and intimidating, but also why it can be very fulfilling and interesting. So where are you going to go? Well, of course, in our modern world, YouTube is a fantastic resource. There are many, many Warcraft channels, too many to list here. I mentioned Platinum WoW above. I mentioned Novel 87, both for the lore. There are many news channels. Taliesin and Evitel are 2 big content creators who put out a weekly news show, among other shows as well, keeping tabs on both the news inside the game and kind of on the other side of the game. Bellular is another big content producer on YouTube. A couple other producers come to mind. Hazelnutty Games puts out a routine news update. Soul So Breezy is another good producer that I've enjoyed in the past. There are also a lot of websites. So many websites that are helpful. I'll list a few here. Wowhead is probably your first go-to. Wowhead just has an army of people clearly coming up with an army's worth of information about the game, both what's coming in the future of the game, but also what is already in existence. And if you need to know about an item or a thing, not only what's available in Wowhead, but often the most helpful thing is the comments on those individual things from users, and they're going to let you know, oh yeah, here's how to find this thing, or here's what to do. MMO Champion is another site, news site and information. Blizzard Watch, Icy Veins, I mentioned earlier about how to set up your talents and set up your rotation and your abilities. Icy Veins is a great source for that. Petopia, I didn't even mention. You could play pet battles. Pet battles inside of Warcraft is another great way to play. Some people get very much into that. It's very much like a Pokemon sort of system. I've never played Pokemon. I do enjoy pet battles a little bit. Pets are also another collection item that people like to collect. Toys are another collection item. So more things. Jamming things in, even in this final section. But Petopia actually is not for those pets. It's for hunter pets. As I mentioned, hunters can tame pets. They can go find new pets, new animals to be their companions. And so that is a great resource for that specific thing. If you've got a specific thing, there's got to be a website out there for you. There is collection websites, keeping track of all the things you've got, where the things are that you don't have. WoW Armory, off the top of my head, is a good source for that. All sorts of different collections it'll help keep track of. Boy, of course, you could jump into podcasts. You're already clearly here listening to a podcast. I'm going to guess this isn't the first Warcraft podcast you've ever heard. If it is, wow, that's fantastic. There's so many good ones out there. The Starting Zone is kind of the surviving biggest podcast, I think, in the Warcraft world. It is a weekly show that hits all the news that's going on in and around the game. It mentions upcoming things. It talks about the experience of playing, what the specific activities for that week or that month are. It is really a great resource for almost every aspect of the game, at least to keep in touch with certain things. And then, of course, everybody gets more specific from there. I mentioned Live, Laugh, Lore as a lore-focused, news-focused podcast. There are podcasts that are focused on the people in the game. There are those that are focused on different aspects of the game. There are classic versions. There are those focused on lore, those who kind of dive into different directions. Unshackled Fury is another one of my favorites. It's kind of a news and opinion weekly or so. Girls Gone WoW is a wonderful podcast. And the last one that I'll mention, but certainly not least, if you're looking for an edgier kind of podcast with some news and reviews and everything that's going on, check out my friends at Thrall's Balls Podcast. Willie and Gershom are pumping out content every week. Gershom was the first content creator to reach out to me and really support me and cheer me on, and I appreciate that so much. And they were kind enough to have me on their podcast recently for a little interview and hanging out. So check them out, Thrall's Balls Pod. Yeah, there's a podcast for you if you want to play solo. I hear there's a podcast for that as well. So dive into your podcast app of choice, search Warcraft, and just start sifting. Discord is a social kind of a social interaction tool. A lot of podcasts and a lot of content creator communities have Discord groups. Discord groups are used, inside the game as well. I don't use Discord much. It's not something I mean, it's social, so I don't dive into a lot of those things, but that can be a way to find new friends, new players. I know the Dungeon Dojo community is a resource that I think solo players will benefit from if you want to get into groups and accomplish some of these things, but in a low stress, low anxiety sort of way. That is a fantastic group, and I think they run a lot of their things through Discord. Twitch streamer communities, you can learn a lot watching Twitch and watching other people play the game. So that's certainly a place. If you are someone who doesn't mind watching Twitch and seeing all the crazy chats go by and that sort of stuff. WoW forums. This is a service offered by Blizzard. It is just a forum posting place where you can put questions and people will respond. It's not support from Blizzard. It is like the community of players answering and talking with occasional messages from the developers, so-called blue posts, because they're posted in blue if it comes from a member of the Blizzard team. The WoW forums, a wealth of old information as well. You can see old questions, check those out, see the answers. They're not always the best place for some answers, and frankly, some people are there just to troll and make a mess of things. So the forums can be their own adventure. I think you'll find them somewhat useful and possibly somewhat not useful. Ultimately, just ask. Head to Facebook groups or other groups. Reach out in game. In game is tough. If you throw a question into the chat, to the group chat or the trade chat or something inside of the game, public chats, you might get answers. You might just get people being whatever. People, humans, not helpful. As many as there are topics, there are even more places to go and learn about those topics. So find what you like, stick with them, stick with those sites, stick with those content creators. There's a big community around WoW, as there is in a lot of video game spaces, but a lot of people doing what I'm doing, talking into some sort of microphone, with or without a camera, with or without visuals, talking about the game, trying to share what they love about the game. So feel free to support those people for the work that they put into that. I have learned how much work that is and how much work that is right in front of me as I look to stop recording this episode and go and start editing this episode. And here I am finally finishing that editing and recording. I give you the second half of the solo queue introduction to World of Warcraft 2024. I need to get back into Azeroth to buy some last bits of gear in the pre-patch and the MOP remix, and then get ready to jump into early access of The War Within coming this Thursday. The plan is to share that early access in the August episode and get that out the weekend before the full launch. This is going to be a busy week, for sure. All the music that you hear is the work of the amazing people at Blizzard. Hashtag don't play muted. Come on. The music, of course, taking us out is the song Ogre by my friends in the real-life doom metal band Ogre. Check them out wherever you find your music. And I definitely want to thank everyone who made this episode, the 12th episode, possible. My lovely and supportive wife, the good folks over at Podbean who are hosting Solo Q, certainly that Sky Guy for all of his questions and input into this second part as well. And a big thanks to Wooly and Gershom, hosts of the Thrall's Balls podcast, for having me on the other day. Check out the episode on your podcast feed and find them at Thrall's Balls Pod on Twitter. If you want to support the show, even in a small way, you can find us on Patreon at SoloQWow. Thank you to current patrons for their financial support: Andrew, Righteous Bandy, and That Sky Guy. And thanks for the additional support from Max, Eddie, and Tim. You can join them all at patreon.com/SOLOQUEUEWOW. Subscribe to the podcast at your podcast feed of choice. If you leave a 5-star rating with Apple or Spotify, that will help this show grow. Continue to grow. It keeps growing. It's amazing. If you're feeling quite randy, go ahead and leave a review and tell the world what you think about Solo Q. As I find those reviews, I will share them on the show. You can contact me at soloqwow@gmail.com with questions, feedback, stories of your own. And you can find me on all the social medias at SoloQ, SOLOQUEUEWOW. Twitter being the most active and probably the least liked, but it is what it is. Enjoy your launch of The War Within. May your queues be short and your lag minuscule. But regardless, remember to be patient. There's a lot going on a launch day, so hang in there and be nice. I hope to be back here very soon with my own launch experience in the August episode. The next time we enter the solo queue, I'll see you out there. And that is really exciting.